Hi everyone, today I want to talk to you about a topic that is very near and dear to my brain. I am on the autistic spectrum, and as such I feel that there is not enough information out there describing what autism really is. And the information that is out there often I feel misrepresents what I experience autism to be. I want to take you through the medical definition of how to diagnose autism that is defined at the moment. I want to take you through some peer-reviewed scientific research that shows several aspects of autism that you might maybe not be aware of yet, including its neurological causes. And I want to give you a personal account of how I experience autism and how autism affects me. So please stay till the end so that you can get the full picture of what I am trying to explain. The reason I'm making this video is twofold. First, for people who think they might be on the spectrum and they're currently trying to figure that out. When I was at that stage, it helped me a lot to hear personal accounts. So I'm trying to give my personal account to see if I can help those. Second, for people who are not on the spectrum, who are trying to understand why people on the spectrum act in a certain way. I hope this video will help you understand your father, brother, sister, friend, children better if they're on the spectrum, to understand why they feel certain things are important and why they feel other things should be avoided or they're uncomfortable with certain things. What is it like to live with autism? And this is the part that I want to give you insight in today. My insight. I want to make very clear, as has been said many times before, if you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. This is my experience. And other people on the spectrum have different experiences. Just like people that are not on the spectrum have differing experiences. The aspect of autism that affects my personal life the most is definitely the way I interact with people. I have a clear impairment in cognitive empathy. That means I'm not good at knowing how somebody feels, what their intention is, are they happy, are they sad? I just can't do that. And it causes misconceptions all the time. Throughout my life, I've offended people without meaning to because they thought I don't care about their feelings, when really I just wasn't aware of their feelings. Remember, cognitive empathy is the ability to know how somebody feels. And when I learned that I've offended somebody by accident, it breaks my heart because I really don't want to hurt people's feelings. The area that's second most affected in my personal life is the way I perceive and process my environment. Meaning my brain's not very good at filtering out what is important. But it's also the reason why I'm so good at understanding large systems, complex systems. Because all the information I absorb gets put into one big bundle and processed together. That's really helpful when in the work I do and understanding large complex systems and strong interconnectivity between systems. But it's not useful when I'm standing in a shopping mall and there is noises coming from everywhere and my wife is trying to tell me something. I can't separate these noises from each other. To give you an idea of what it's like, this is what it's like for me. I can't filter it out. It's very hard to concentrate. Even thinking about it hurts my brain. I can physically feel the pain inside my brain and there's noises coming from everywhere and I'm trying to listen. But I just can't separate all these other noises. They're always there. And the same is with bright lights. And so I avoid parties. I avoid large gatherings because they make me uncomfortable. They make it difficult for me to function. When I get into that state, I forget how to do basic things. I forget how to talk. I forget what I came here to do. I start stimming. Self-stimulation. I start flapping my hand like this because I can control this. My brain just wants to let this out. I start pressing my fists. I I do anything I can to feel the same stimulation physically that I feel inside my brain. And imagine you're working overtime, your brain is running wild, and then somebody comes up and tells you something and gives you another task to do. And this is kind of what it's like. And so I get irrationally angry at these times as well, completely without reason, simply because my brain is exhausted. It can't handle anything else anymore. Since I learned that I have autism, it's become easier because I now know to manage it. When I feel it coming on and my wife tells me that I look distraught, I go into a dark room, put active noise cancellation headphones on, and just get sensory deprivation, as little sensory input as possible until my brain catches up with processing everything that I've been experiencing. At work, I wear active noise cancelling headphones so they can block out the noise for me that I can't filter out myself. But to sum up my experience, I'm a very happy person. I'm happily married. I love my family. I love my autism. I am able to use my autism at work daily. My brain is optimized for working in that way, and I wouldn't give it up for the world. But I do need to adapt my life to be able to work around these impairments that I have socially, to compensate for them. So have you ever wondered who decides what's a mental disorder? What's considered a mental disorder? Well, the answer is, in the United States, that's the APA, or the American Psychiatric Association. They released a book called the DSM-5, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. The DSM-5 is the latest version of this manual and is the principal authority for diagnosis of mental disorders in the US. Now, I'm not personally from the US, but outside the US, this manual is also widely used as reference guide. Disclaimer, I do not believe that the DSM is the correct source of information if you're looking for your first information about autism. It's very much geared towards doctors, and it's very much outdated, I personally feel as well. A lot of the diagnostic criteria are geared towards boys because in the past we've seen autism mainly in boys, but that's due to this diagnostic criteria. A bit of a chicken and egg problem, and that's the main reason why lots of girls on the spectrum drop off and don't get recognized. So while the DSM-5 is a good use, if you're looking for information, don't use it as the single source of truth. Look for more information, and I'm trying to give you more angles, but I will go through what the medical professionals look at when they decide if somebody has autism or not in today's world. So what does the DSM-5 say? First, I want to clear a bit confusion that may be out there. You might have heard of something called Asperger's syndrome or classic autism, autism spectrum disorder. There's lots of terms floating around, and the reason for that is that in the DSM-4, the older version of the DSM, there was 3 different mental disorders recognized: autistic disorder, Asperger disorder, and pervasive developmental disorder not otherwise specified. These 3 were put together into a spectrum diagnosis under autism spectrum disorder in DSM-5. So today, there is no Asperger disorder anymore officially in the DSM. There is no autism disorder anymore. It's all referred to as autism spectrum disorder, referring to the spectrum as the amount of support that is required by the person that is on the spectrum. What are these diagnostic criteria that the DSM-5 refers to? Let's have a look. A. Persistent deficits in social communication and social interaction across multiple contexts. That means what most people understand autism to be is an impairment in social interaction. B. Restricted, repetitive patterns of behavior, interests, or activities. People on the spectrum are very comfortable with repetitive patterns, with behaviors. They have interests that are very unique maybe to them. C. Symptoms must be present in the early developmental period, but may not become fully manifest until social demands exceed limited capacities, or may be masked by learned strategies in later life. So this one is very interesting to me because I agree with it completely. I have done this. I grew up on the spectrum, not understanding that I was autistic. I did what this refers to as masking. I learned behaviors to be able to mirror what other people do, copy their behaviors to make it look like I understand the social dynamics, when really I did not. I didn't do this consciously, but my brain just found this way of being ridiculed the least, probably. Being able to fit in and assuming that everyone else feels the same and everyone's doing these things, so I did the same. This is what used to be called Asperger's syndrome, but now it's on the autism spectrum, and I agree with that because this support may be masked up. But as we will learn later in research, this does happen very early in life. These brain structures develop in a certain way that facilitate a way of thinking that we now call autism. And while I didn't intentionally mask my behavior, I became so good at it that once I realized that I was on the spectrum and I told people about this, the amount of people who told me, no, that's not possible, you're a normal person, was shocking. And it's very, very demoralizing when this happens. So if somebody tells you that they're on the spectrum, don't put it down thinking that you understand it better than they do. D. Symptoms cause clinically significant impairment in social, occupational, or other important areas of current functioning. This is where I start to disagree with the DSM-5, because it says only if you struggle in life can you be autistic. And that's not true. My brain works the way it works, regardless of whether I manage to live with it or not. The medical diagnosis of autism should not be dependent on whether I can manage it or not. I'm a happy person, I'm married, I have children, I have a good job, but that doesn't mean I'm not autistic. But this criteria would suggest that. And that's why it's important to differentiate between having autism and how much support you need. And last but not least, E. These disturbances are not better explained by intellectual disability, also known as intellectual developmental disorder or global developmental delay, meaning that these same symptoms can happen if you have low intelligence. But if there is no low intelligence and there's still these symptoms, then it's considered autism spectrum disorder. And that's why I want to leave the DSM-5 for today and move on to research into the biomedical causes of autism. Biomedical reasons. I'm not a doctor. Do not trust me on this. Trust the people that I took the information from. A lot of the information I compiled from a talk by Baron-Cohen, who is the director of the Autism Research Center at Cambridge University. I put a link to the talk in the description as well as a card up there. If you're not familiar with Professor Baron-Cohen's work, I highly suggest looking into it. He does great work, he's very good at explaining things, and he's got a very, very good approach to autism. And if you're interested in autism, I highly suggest checking out the video. I'm gonna summarize some of the work that he's done in a talk that he's given in 2016. In this video, explain the concepts that I found very, very interesting and enlightening and that I feel need to get out more into the world. But if you're interested in this, watch the whole talk and learn all about it. First, I want to introduce to you the autism spectrum quotient. It's a quantitative measurement of how many autistic traits someone has, using a standardized test of 50 questions. I'll put a link to it in the description. There's a different test for adults and children. It's questions that ask you about your behavior and how you feel in certain situations, and you fill them out and then behave in a way that autistic people behave. It's considered an autistic trait. The test really shows that we all have autistic traits, if we're on the spectrum or not. That's not meaning that the spectrum reaches from everybody's a bit autistic to being fully autistic. That's not what that means. Having autistic traits just means you behave the way autists are expected to behave. To be considered on the autism spectrum, the number of autistic traits that you have needs to be over a certain threshold. When the autism quotient was tested among students in Cambridge, It was interesting to know that students that were working in scientific studies, had a higher number of autistic traits on average than the students that were working in the humanities. There was not a higher number of people with autism in the scientific community. That's not what this test showed. It showed that even among the people who did not have autism, the number of people with autistic traits was higher among those working in science. So what exactly is an autistic trait? I feel it's best understood by understanding the empathizing, systemizing plane, as described by Dr. Baron-Cohen. At this point, we're talking about empathy, and I think it's very, very important to distinguish between two different types of empathy. Cognitive empathy and affective empathy. They're very different from each other. Cognitive empathy is the ability to detect somebody else's emotional state from facial expressions, body language, other non-verbal cues, essentially knowing how somebody feels without the person telling you how they feel. Effective empathy is what comes afterwards. It's once you know how somebody feels, that you feel with them. The ability to put yourself in their shoes and feel compassion or feel joy with them. People with autism have impaired cognitive empathy. That means people with autism are not as good as normal people at detecting how somebody feels without being told to do so. People on the spectrum usually do not have an impairment in affective empathy. In fact, in my personal experience, talking, working, and meeting people on the spectrum, it's rather the opposite. I find them all to be very, very passionate, compassionate, and caring. When they understand somebody is in need, they learn somebody is sad, they will feel very, very bad and do all that they can to improve that person's emotional state. This difference is very important to understand because it puts to rest this misconception that people with autism are not empathetic, that they don't care about other people. To highlight this difference between cognitive and affective empathy, I want to give you a little scenario to explain it better. Imagine a world where everybody wakes up in the morning, and if they're feeling happy, they wear a green shirt, and if they're feeling sad, they wear a red shirt. That makes it super easy for everyone to know how everyone feels. You go out, you see somebody with a green shirt, they're happy. You see somebody with a red shirt, they're sad. Except for people that are colorblind. People that are colorblind will all of a sudden not be able to tell how somebody feels anymore. Now, if the friend tells them that they're feeling sad, that colorblind person would still want to comfort them, will do the best they can to make them feel better. They feel compassion for them. A lack of cognitive empathy is like being emotionally colorblind. You can't see what other people can see very clearly, which is how somebody feels. But it is not related to the ability to empathize with somebody. And so the empathizing that we're talking about in this diagram now is cognitive empathy. How good is somebody at understanding somebody else's emotional state? So we'll show empathizing and systemizing on a 2D plane. On the horizontal axis, we show the systemizing quotient. That is your ability to understand systems of any kind. And on the vertical axis, we show the empathizing quotient. That tells you how good you are at detecting how somebody feels. A study across the general public showed very, very interesting results. It showed the majority of women in the top left corner being good at empathizing, but not as good at systemizing. The majority of men in the bottom right corner being good at systemizing, but not so good at empathizing. But people on the spectrum are even deeper into the right corner on average. That means that they're even worse at empathizing and even better at systemizing than average men. Just to be clear, this does not say anything about individuals. There were women in the study that were much better at systemizing than men and much worse at empathizing, and there were men that are very good at empathizing that were not good at systemizing. But we're looking at this statistical average today, which suggests that people with autism have social impairments because they are not as good at empathizing, but that other areas, like systemizing, are actually superior on average than a neurotypical brain. Neurotypical, by the way, means essentially your brain works the way most people's brains work. So the next question we're going to analyze is, where does autism come from? Research has definitely shown that there's a genetic aspect to it. The average probability to have autism is 2 to 3% among the general public. But if one child in a family has autism, then the probability that another child in that same family also has autism is 33%, 1 in 3. That means there is a genetic predisposition to autism. Professor Baron-Cohen touches on the evolutionary aspect of autism as a next step not to develop autism, but simply to favor brain structures that are good at systemizing. Because that's the tasks we need more and more today in this world. When analyzing the occupation of fathers of diagnosed children with autism, there was a disproportionate amount of them working in the field of engineering. More fathers of children on the autism spectrum worked in engineering than fathers of children that are not on the spectrum. The same pattern was found with grandfathers on both sides of the family, suggesting that it's not autism that is necessarily just genetic, but actually even the need for autistic traits, the ability to systemize, a brain structure that is optimized for this style of thinking, because the jobs we do today are a lot more systemizing than they were. So this in turn then raised the question, areas where there's a lot of engineers, you would find more children or people with autism. They did a study in Eindhoven, which is a city in the Netherlands, where there's a lot of engineering going on. It's comparable to Silicon Valley for Europe. They compared it to 2 other Dutch cities of similar size and demographic, Haarlem and Utrecht, and found that the rate of diagnosed autism among children is more than twice that of other cities. This supports the theory that in a place where a lot of engineering is happening, you will find more people with autism because they gravitate towards these occupations. So how exactly does an autistic brain differ from a neurotypical one? An autistic brain is worse at empathizing, but better at systemizing on average. But what does the brain actually look like? Studies looking into childhood brain development found that on average, the brain of an autistic child grows faster than the brain of a neurotypical child. A post-mortem study found that autistic brains have 65% more neurons in the frontal cortex in comparison to brains of neurotypicals. The autistic brains are also heavier when weighed post-mortem and have more neurons in different parts of the brain. There's also research showing that there are more synapses between neurons in autistic brains. So not only are there more neurons, but there is also more interconnectivity between those neurons in an autistic brain. I wanted to show you this because I think it's important to know that the brain is actually developing different. This is not just a behavioral change or preferences. This is a different brain structure, biomedically measurable. It's kind of like different computers that are built for different tasks. If you're familiar with ray tracing, then you know maybe that there are ray tracing cores on modern graphics cards. These ray tracing cores are really, really good at ray tracing, but they are not very good at other tasks. So although these super fast graphics cards allow you to run games very efficiently and render graphics really well, they can help you run your browser, for example, or do other tasks that you do on your computer every day, write an email, because they're not optimized for that. The same way, an autistic brain is good at systemizing to a degree that you might not even be able to comprehend, but they struggle in other things like empathizing, cognitive empathy, and understanding how people feel. If you're not so familiar with computers, then think of it as the difference between having an iPhone or an Android phone. The operating system is different. They're good at different things and they work slightly differently and they can't really work well together. So now we know what the difference is between the brains, and I've said that autistic brains are better at systemizing, but how do we know this for real? In the past, tests have been compiled, and I'm going to take you through some of them that determine how somebody thinks. This test is called the Embedded Figures test, and it's designed to find detail as opposed to the overall picture. The purpose is to find the shape you can see on the bottom in the top picture. Some of you might have found it already while I was talking. I'm sure some of you are still searching for it, simply because of statistics. People on the spectrum find this much quicker than neurotypical people on average, because people on the spectrum look more into detail. What I found very interesting about this is that when it was performed in an MRI machine, not only were the children on the spectrum better at performing the task, but the brain activity was lower than the brain activity of neurotypicals, meaning that their brain didn't work as hard while still outperforming the other children, showing that it is the different brain structure optimized for different tasks. Another test is this one. If you look at this shape, what letter do you see? The majority of people with neurotypical brains will see an A, while the majority of people on the spectrum will first see the H, because the people on the spectrum observe the detail before they observe the overall picture. But observing detail allows them to see patterns where other people can't. This test, for example, was designed to find patterns. People on the spectrum get more of these tests correct than people that are not on the spectrum. Last but not least, this is a test designed to test the systemizing ability. This mechanical system is shown. It's said that the wheel is turning counterclockwise, and the question is, this point P, where is it going to move towards? This test was done with 12-year-olds on the spectrum and a group of 12-year-olds that are not on the spectrum for control. You can see the results there. More people on the spectrum got this correct on average than people in the control group that were not on the spectrum. I hope this video has taught you something, anything. Since you're still here, I assume you've enjoyed the video, so please share it with at least one person so we can raise awareness of how autism really affects people, what autism is, and so people can understand why people on the autism spectrum behave the way they do and the benefits that they can bring into society. With that, I want to leave you today, and thanks for watching. Remember to subscribe, and I'll see you next time.